Welcome to Soul Path Alchemy, the place where we talk about the things most people avoid: sex, relationships, grief, desire, betrayal, healing, and everything in between. It's honest, it's unsanitized, and if it's what you've been craving, you're in the right place. I'm Annie O'Brien, psychotherapist, clinical hypnotherapist, and if you need more info, it's all in the bio. Let's begin. Heads up, this podcast isn't therapy. It's bold, blunt, and irreverent, but it's not a substitute for professional help. Full disclaimer is in the blurb below. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the affair mirror. So this episode is for anyone who's ever found themselves caught in the wake of an affair, whether as the betrayed partner, the one who cheated, or the person they turned to. It's not here to justify or condemn, but to unpack what really happens beneath the surface, the unconscious dynamics of unmet needs, emotional blind spots, and the deeper questions that affairs force into the light. Why do people betray? Why do others become the other? What's really being played out? And what can it teach everyone? This is an honest, unsentimental look at the psychology of affairs for anyone ready to really understand the mirror that they hold up. So essentially, there's a theme of being unchosen but desire, and it's very much the soul ache of being second place. So there are mistresses and other men throughout history. This occurs across age groups, whether people are married or just in committed long-term relationships. They weren't chosen because they weren't enough. They were chosen because they wouldn't ask for too much. And because somewhere deep down, something about that ache was familiar, not safe but known. Affairs don't begin with sex. They begin in silence, in neglect, and in fantasy, in a quiet space where someone becomes the one that they reach for in the dark or in loneliness, but never stand beside in the light. So this is about soul-deep dissonance of being almost loved, of being wanted but never claimed, of becoming the secret but not the story, of waking up inside a fantasy bond and mistaking it for some kind of fate. So I'm going to go straight into the underworld of relational limbo, these affairs, the ones that unfold in silence, in secrecy, and in someone's blind spot. The ones where someone is betrayed by their partner or by themselves. This isn't just about the one who cheated, it's also about the one that they turned to. And the one that they turned away from or possibly left behind. People say they want love, but many only know how to survive in half love. They long for connection but fear what might be revealed under full light. So they choose the unreachable or become the one who can't be reached, because love that never fully arrives never has to stay. So what are the psychodynamics of being the other? So it's a trauma echo, essentially, being close to love but not secure in it. The fantasy is safer than the reality because reality requires presence, vulnerability, and high stakes. The unavailable lover allows an individual to project. They don't contradict fantasy. And being the secret activates childhood patterns of specialness, secrecy, and longing. So you don't have to survive real love when you're living inside the idea of it. So mistress and master are simply codes for emotionally displaced placeholders, except people romanticize it so that they don't have to feel shame. There is actually a quiet violence to being almost loved, to being seen but not chosen, to holding someone's secrets but not their name. People don't become the other by accident. They arrive there with a particular blueprint, one that was drawn long before this particular individual wandered into their lives. Perhaps in the four walls of their family childhood home, in a house where presence was conditional and affection had a price. So being the other lets an individual be close to love without risking the terror of actually being held by it. It's emotional proximity without exposure, erotic charge without accountability, and it's a fantasy connection without the risk of rejection because it never officially was offered to begin with. At a surface level, this really looks like passion, but peel back the layers and it's often shame in disguise. Shame that says, I don't deserve full love. Shame that says, I must be exceptional to be tolerated. So individuals who are the other accept a role where they get just enough to feel special, but not enough to be real. Because if it became real, they fear they might be left. So here's the paradox. The other person, and by that I mean the individual either married or in a long-term committed relationship, the emotionally unavailable individual, they feel safe precisely because they're unsafe. Their emotional unavailability gives the mistress or the other man a script that feels familiar, and that gives a sense of control. So essentially, these people don't have to be surprised by abandonment if it was baked in from the start. They don't have to be disappointed by the individual's withdrawal because withdrawal is the rhythm of the bond. So these people confuse longing with love, pain with passion, uncertainty with intensity, and what they're really doing is reenacting a wound that they still secretly believe is their fault. The relationship is usually a house built on sand, so it's built on fantasy bonds and intermittent reinforcement. So let me name it clearly. A fantasy bond is an illusion of closeness, but it's not built on reality but on projection, imagination, and emotional starvation. It's a love affair with the idea of the person and with the version of themselves that they become when that individual desires the mistress or the other man. So fantasy bonds don't require mutuality. They require intensity, uncertainty, and desperate hope that the next interaction will finally mean something. And that's what makes intermittent reinforcement so deadly. If someone ignores somebody 10 times and texts on the 11th time, a nervous system will light up like a Christmas tree. So they bond to the moment that the person showed up and erase all the 10 times they didn't. Just like a child bonds to the one day their parent took them to the zoo and tries to forget the neglect or the silence, or in some cases, absence and violence for the rest of the year. This psychological pattern creates a really deep addiction, and the shame of it is this. The mistress/other man knows that it's not real, but they can't let go because they feel the next time it might be different. They start spiritualizing it. Oh, there's a soul tie. Oh, they're my twin flame. Oh, the timing just isn't right. But let me call it what it is. It's not a divine delay, it's a trauma bond, plain and simple. The fantasy lets the individual feel chosen without risking rejection. It gives them a role as the muse, the secret, the soulmate in waiting, and lets the individual postpone the grief of realizing that they were never actually seen. And that's why it's so hard to grieve when it ends, because the heartbreak isn't just about the person losing them. It's about losing the self that the mistress or the other man performed in their presence, the one who hoped, the one who imagined, the one who almost got loved. You see, mature, healthy people would not be interested in being someone else's side piece. It would never appeal. Grounded people who are working on themselves would literally, as soon as they would find out, because sometimes people don't know, they would exit stage right and they would stand up to the person in the long-term committed relationship. So let's look a little bit deeper at why people chase the unavailable. So this is all about erotic deferral and the charge of being wanted but not being claimed. So for these people, there's a particular electricity in being wanted but not taken, and it lives in the space between a hand that almost touches an individual and a sentence that always ends with if only. This is where erotic deferral thrives. Erotic deferral is the thrill of anticipation without a resolution. It's the eroticization of distance and the romanticization of what is always just out of reach. In a way, it's a perfect storm. The person feels chosen but not claimed, desired but not integrated into someone's life, adored but never picked up from the airport. And the body doesn't know it's a trap. It just knows it's lit up. The charge, it's chemical, the dopamine of maybe, the cortisol of uncertainty, and the oxytocin of memory. This is not love. It's a neurochemical cocktail that people mistake for fate. Because to them, every text feels like a breadcrumb trail back to hope. Every half smile, every delay, every I wish things were different gets stored in someone's nervous system, and they believe that this is intimacy. It's not. It's inflation. You inflate the moments because the gaps between are starving you. And here's the kicker, you don't have to be sexually involved for this to happen. People defer to the erotic all the time, in workplace flirtations that never cross the line, in friendships soaked in tension, in late night texts that say I miss you but never lead to anything. And the charge is in the gap, not in the union. And that's what makes it so addictive to certain types of people. For them, it's safer to be longed for than known, safer to be imagined than truly held. Because being truly held would require a kind of vulnerability that terrifies a part of them that they're convinced is too hard to love, essentially. So if they stay in the erotic limbo, they're never fully dismissed, never fully touched. They become a kind of a poem instead of a person. It's an ache instead of partnership and a story instead of a truth. However, none of it is real, none of it's authentic, and none of it has integrity. This is not a soulmate, soul contract, it's a trauma reenactment. The soulmate concept gets thrown about, but it's a complete delusion. So, why do people chase the unavailable? And why does it hurt them so much? There's a deeper current underneath it all. People don't chase the unavailable because they're stupid. They chase it because somewhere in their history, that kind of love felt like home to them. Not a good home, not a safe one, but a known one. So they mistake familiarity for fate. They confuse the emotional landscape of very early neglect with the terrain of true connection. Because the unavailable person, they echo something to them. Maybe it's the parent who lit up when they achieved something, but looked through them when they cried. Maybe it's the sibling rivalry that taught them to win affection by being the clever one, the funny one, the helpful one, fill in the blank. Maybe it's the emotionally absent mother who loved them very much but didn't know how to attune to their pain, so they learned to perform their strength and they learned to suppress their needs. So chasing the unavailable isn't about them, it's about the unfinished story inside of the mistress or the other man. It's their wound that says, if I can make this person love me, I'll finally undo the original rejection. But you cannot rewrite trauma with the same pen essentially that wrote it. You can't turn absence into presence by earning it harder. And every time someone ghosts them, or breadcrumbs them, or delays them, they sink deeper into this trance. They essentially make the chase itself become their purpose. They stop noticing how little they're receiving because the pursuit becomes the proof of their devotion. But it's not to the other person, it's actually to the echoes in their childhood, the ghosts of the nursery, and so on. So, love is not a performance, and it's not their job to rehabilitate someone else's emotional limitations just to feel worthy. And yet, these people would rather chase someone emotionally unreachable than sit in the grief of their own unmet needs, because grief is final and chasing keeps the fantasy alive. That's why people stay, because letting go would mean facing the hole in their chest that was there long before this person and feeling the sadness that was never allowed to rise in childhood and admitting that this entire dance has been a way to delay the pain. So essentially, psychodynamically, this is reenactment, trying to win the unwinnable. Most people think they're choosing love, but they're choosing the chance to finally win where they once lost. That's the heart of reenactment. They don't just fall for the unavailable, they fall for the familiar configuration of longing, striving, partial reward, and quiet shame. They chase not because this person is right for them, but because some part of them believes that if they get this one to stay, they'll finally rewrite the past. The ache underneath isn't new, it's ancient. It's the ache of the child who brought home a drawing and got a nod instead of delight. It's the ache of a teenager who confided in a parent who didn't hear the tremble in their voice, or the adult who keeps choosing silence because it feels like love, because they're making it try to feel like love. They don't have an actual healthy template of love. Reenactment is the unconscious belief that closure is possible, but only if they do it better this time. But what if it's not about doing it better? What if it's about stopping the audition altogether? That's the rupture, the break in the cycle, the moment that they realize, hey, it was never your job to earn what should have been given freely. So I'm just going to touch on triangulation and the shame beneath. There's a brutal kind of theatre to being the other. So an individual who's a mistress or the other man, they're cast in a play that already has a lead. They're the understudy, but they're trying to act like the star. And the worst part is that they actually know it. Triangulation is the psychological sleight of hand that keeps everyone slightly starving and slightly competing. It's not just about infidelity or cheating, it's about being positioned. So it's about them being the person who gets told things the partner doesn't know. It's about them being the emotional crutch, the ego boost, the confessor, and the escape hatch. They become important by being in contrast to someone else. So things like this might be said, oh, they don't get me the way you do. You're the only one I can really talk to. With you, I feel like myself again, blah, blah, blah. Those lines, they might feel like love to somebody who comes from a triangulating kind of household, but they're half love, it's just crumbs. So with eco crumbs, little drips of specialness are used to keep the person hooked. They tell themselves, they're not happy in that relationship. It's just timing. They'll leave eventually. But months and even years pass, and they still think of the person that they text at midnight, but never walk beside at noon. So they are adored in the dark, but never named in the light. And underneath the fantasy, beneath the erotic deferral, the soulmate story, or rather lie, and the one-day dream, what lives underneath is something much harder to name, a shame. A shame that says, they're accepting being second. They're negotiating with their own dignity. They're letting themselves stay in a story where it had no ending. And shame doesn't shout, it whispers. This is all you'll ever get. You're not lovable enough to be chosen outright. If you had more value, you'd be the one that they came home to. They say all kinds of variations on those themes. And the person that carries the shame like a secret inside a secret, because, the world will never grieve with mistresses or the other men. It doesn't hold space for them. There are no sympathy cards for almost relationships. And there's just a silence there that no one else will ever validate. So there's a massive delayed grief and mourning with unofficial relationships. So this is the part that people don't talk about. When the affair ends, or worse, because it never really truly began, they don't ever get a proper closure and breakup. They never get rage or catharsis or a public goodbye. They get disintegration. Because what they were mourning wasn't a real relationship, it was a possible one. And the grief of what could have been can feel even heavier than the grief of what was. So there was no beginning, so how do they mark the end? There's no story to tell, just secrets and 1,000 unsaid things that they keep whispering to themselves and running over and over again in their inner dialogue. This is very complicated and complex grief. If someone's ever been in this position, what you're grieving is the self you performed for that person, the part of you that hoped very hard, the imagined life that you wove between, meetings, text messages, glances, the belief that one day just maybe they might choose you. But they didn't, or they couldn't, or they promised, or they did, but too late. And no one will ever tell you how to mourn something that never existed on paper. No one can give you a ritual for the role that society tells you to be ashamed of. So the grief stays hidden, it's delayed, it's very muffled, it's, lying low until one day, hopefully, an individual will finally say to themselves, I wasn't chosen, but I'm done choosing people who don't stand in the light with me. Saying that is a sign of maturity, of evolution. So I'm also going to talk here about unconscious competition, the hidden engine of all of this, That's what drives the thrill of the chase. Most people think they're falling in love, but often they're falling into position. Not beside someone, not in mutual connection, but into an old familiar hierarchy. Unconscious competition is the compulsion to win love by outperforming an invisible rival. It starts early. Maybe you had a sibling who got more attention and you learned to shine harder, or a parent who had a favourite and you spent your childhood trying to outdo ghosts, or a family system where love wasn't shared, it was earned, fought for, strategized. So this individual, if they find themselves in this particular situation, without realizing it, is choosing people who are already taken, already in a relationship, still hung up on an ex, emotionally entangled with a parent, or just so ambivalent that every drop of affection will feel like a prize to them. And if this is you, you might think you're in love, but you're actually in competition, not just with their partner, but with their past, with their ideal, with the version of you that they said they wanted, but never ever pursued. So I hope this makes sense, because in the mind of the mistress or the other man, if you can win them, you feel that you can rewrite the story, that you will get to be enough this time, or you'll get to beat the rival that the younger you couldn't. And here's the heartbreak. This individual is not chasing love, they're chasing victory, and even if they win, they lose, because they'll never feel safe with someone that they had to fight to keep. They'll never feel cherished by someone that they felt that they had to outperform to hold. They'll always be watching their back, waiting for the next rival to arrive. And the saddest part? They'll never feel truly chosen, because their nervous system only knows love through comparison. And I just want to include the psychology of the pursuer, right? So why some people go after the taken, because I've often had people who've been cheated on, and I've sat with them in therapy, and they'd often say, why would someone do that? Why would they go after someone they know is taken? So there's so many different threats to this. So let's start with the truth. Most people who pursue someone already in a relationship aren't trying to be cruel. They're not setting out to destroy a marriage or a long-term partnership or tear a family apart. But intention isn't the same as awareness. Going after someone who's unavailable is almost never about the person themselves. It's about what that person represents in the psyche of the pursuer. So we have unconscious competition and the need to outdo. I've touched on this earlier, but it's at the core here. This isn't always conscious. In fact, it rarely is. So somewhere deep down, the unavailable partner becomes a symbolic prize. So the person will feel within themselves, if I can be chosen over their wife or their husband, I'll finally feel like I matter. If I can be better than the person they committed to, then I must be lovable. If I can win, I undo every time I felt second best in childhood. Let me say this really, really clearly, and this is just simply my take on this truth. It's not love, it's revenge disguised as romance. and the person they win becomes a trophy in a very old war that they've never admitted they were fighting. So another layer of this is avoidant attachment. Ironically, chasing someone who's taken is often not about closeness, it's about protection. So if someone pursues someone unavailable, they get to fantasize about love but never risk the real thing. They can stay in longing, which is erotic, instead of intimacy, which is exposing. They won't be left because it never really started. It's very much a pseudo intimacy with a built in escape. And that's why people with deeply avoidant patterns can come across as the most intense, most romantic, most all in lovers, as long as there's a structural block, a spouse, a long term relationship commitment, a distance that guarantees it won't go too far. So, this is a shadow projection. The unavailable partner often holds the qualities the pursuer denies in themselves: confidence, warmth, stability, sexuality and charm, charisma, etc., etc. So, by bonding to them or stealing them, the pursuer unconsciously tries to absorb those traits by association. So, if the individual has a wife who's nurturing, the mistress may become sexually wild. If the husband is grounded, the other man becomes emotionally attuned. It's not about connection, it's about balancing the shadow. So the person essentially is saying to themselves unconsciously, if I can take their partner, I become what I feel I'm missing. But the shadow doesn't integrate through conquest. It integrates through self-confrontation. And most people would rather flirt with chaos than sit in their own lack. And some people live with a background hum of unworthiness, a deep inherited belief that they're not special, not lovable, not enough. But if someone already committed chooses them, that shame appears to be alchemized. They feel exalted somehow. They kind of say to themselves, oh, they chose me over their life, their vows, their family. I must be something extraordinary. But I'm going to burst that bubble too, because it's a house of cards. Because deep down they know they were chosen in secrecy, not in wholeness, and that shame returns tenfold when the affair ends or never fully begins. And we move on to vicarious power through triangulation. Sometimes the person who goes after someone's partner isn't even romantically driven, they're power driven. They feel insignificant, so they insert themselves into a love bond that already exists to feel central. So essentially what they're saying to themselves is, if I can come between them, I have power, or if I can take what they have, I will not be as worthless as I feel. And this shows up in friend groups, work dynamics, even family systems. It's less about desire, more about disruption, less about love, more about proving they matter. So when somebody's been cheated on, that's often what makes it feel so personal, because it was. Not because the existing partner wasn't enough, but because the third person saw their light and wanted to steal a little of it. So how do you break this pattern? How does someone step out of the waiting room? No pattern will break unless you fully understand it. And no pattern will break until someone stops feeding the pattern. So the individuals need to stop calling longing love, and they need to stop mistaking secrecy for specialness, and they need to stop chasing people who only look at them when no one else is around. The pattern doesn't break when they're finally chosen, it breaks when they decide to stop auditioning. So, name the role you've been playing. This is about truth, not shame. Say it plainly. I was a fantasy, I was the emotional support pet, I was the ego supply, I was the substitute for something they couldn't face. Clarity may hurt, but it will also set you free. Because until the role is named, you cannot reclaim yourself. Then one has to admit what it cost. This is the step most people skip. They don't move on, they try and date again, they look for a rebound, they journal it away, but they don't grieve the self-abandonment they endured just to stay in the game. So they need to ask themselves, what part was muted to keep this going? What part of their life did they pause while waiting? And why did they lower their standards and call it patience? And then I would often say to somebody, say this aloud. This cost you your dignity, your time, your softness, your self-trust. Only then can you begin to restore what was eroded. And then it's about looking at emotional malnourishment. And the truth is this, you will never heal if you keep calling crumbs a meal. So if you or someone you know is in a situation, they need to make that their new religion. If someone flakes, they're not emotionally safe. If they hide you, they're not a match for you. If they don't claim you with both hands, walk away. And I don't mean with anger, I mean from a place of honor. Because a nervous system that's used to starvation will cling to any signal. So these people have to teach their body that real love feels stable, boring, even uncomfortable at first, because it doesn't spike into a survival mode mechanism. And then the grief has to be felt that they've been avoiding. They need to let it come, all of it. The tears that they didn't cry because there was nothing official, the humiliation of waiting, the shame of settling for half love, the ache of never being chosen. Don't reframe it, don't spiritualize it, just grieve it in its mess, in its reality, and in its loss. Because grief is the ending ritual that fantasy never allows. And then build a new identity that doesn't need to win to be worthy. This is the spiritual piece. What if you're already lovable without competing, outperforming, seducing, or proving? What if you don't need to be chosen by them or anyone because you've finally chosen yourself? When you stop chasing, you don't just walk away. You reparent the part of you that thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. So what you have to do is actually connect to that particular part and say, I see you, I won't put you in that position again. We're not going to fight to be loved anymore. We're going to receive it fully or not at all. Healthy love doesn't spike cortisol. It doesn't come in riddles. It's very straightforward. It's very grounded. It doesn't arrive after dark and vanish by morning. It's not a fantasy. It's a felt sense. Your body knows it by what it stops doing. It stops bracing, it stops shrinking, it stops waiting. There are no rivals, no roles to audition for, no shadow script to follow. You don't have to become smaller to be palatable. You don't have to become sexier to be seen. You don't have to become smarter to be safe. You just have to become yourself, fully, calmly, without agenda, without angles, and the right person will see you. Not in secret, not in shame, not in flickers, but in full light on purpose without delay. Because healthy love doesn't make you question your sanity. It doesn't live in parentheses or hypotheticals. It doesn't sound like one day. It sounds like I'm here, I'm showing up, you matter, we're building this together now. It feels peaceful, not performative, nourishing, not addictive, grounded, not grandiose. It's the kind of love that makes you less dramatic, not more. It returns you to your body and it brings you back to your day, your work, your voice, and instead of leaving you stuck on red in your own mind. And you'll know it because it's mutual, it's consistent, it's not afraid to name itself, it's very upfront and straightforward. Healthy love names things. It says relationship, not whatever this is. It says ours, not mine in secret. It says now, not maybe someday. And here's the truth you've been circling all along. The love that requires you to abandon yourself to feel chosen is not love. It's a repetition. It's a wound echoing in disguise, and you don't need to carry it anymore. You weren't chosen because you were safe. You were chosen because you wouldn't ask for more. But now you will. And that's how the pattern breaks. Not with revenge, not with being picked, but with remembering that love, real love, doesn't require you to disappear. So if you've been the other man, or you've been a mistress, or somehow involved in an emotional affair, or in the waiting room, leave it now. And remember this, the door was never locked, only your hope was. If this episode put words on something you've lived but never spoken, share it, quietly or boldly, with a friend, with yourself, because naming this pattern is how it loses its grip. This is Soul Path Alchemy, where ache turns into insight and love, real love, starts with no longer hiding from yourself. And as always, don't wait in the wings, take the stage or leave the theatre, but don't live in the in-between. Thank you for listening. I'm Annie. Have a really great day.